Sound is good. The key to wellness. This is a story about life. It is both ancient and symbolic of New Age. It is about personal genius. It represents the idea that each of us contains the key to wellness, that what we believe affects our state of health and well-being, that all things are the sum of something moving. Even our language is actually patterned motor movement. I can be a spokesperson for some tidbits and reaffirm in you things you've suspected about the body being the mind's experience of itself, that we perceive reality through our senses, that we live what we speak and speak what we live next, that we exist outside ourselves, that all things have a physiology, including the words we speak. Generalizations which omit reference to ourselves allow us to be intensely formless in our thoughts. So I'll be simple and say, when things make sense, they jive with things we already understand inside. By the age of 6, most of us have an understanding of the essence of the universe, and from this time onward, we are learning to articulate what we know inside. I was raised on an island between Tasmania and the mainland of Australia, where we run cattle and sheep. The history of the island goes back to the time of the first post office south of Sydney. Our island was a trading outpost for whalers and sealers first inhabiting the area 7 generations ago. When I was small, I remember feeling like a day was like a year. I remember being pleasantly refreshed by nature's breath and how every part of me felt like I was licked wet all over. In the warmth of the day, things seemed to expand and move around, and in the cool of the night, things seemed to contract and go inside. I figured Dad had come from a deep place in the sea, and Mum from the mountains. Dad said Mum came from the highest place in the land, from a place called Nepal. Dad felt Mum was bestowed with an acute ability at seeing. I loved learning then, and still do. Can you remember the experience of realizing the use of some learning, and the wave of euphoria sweeping over you from this learning? I remember my father hoisting me high in the air, just as I remember the feeling as I would start to plummet at the height of falling. My heart would stop. Yet before I could react, I was hoisted high in the air again. This time I contracted my tummy and sensed control over my heart and tummy meeting. I remember how my body tingled and flushed with delight as I realized I was controlling the unpleasant stimulus of the plummet from the top of the hoist. The mastery of contracting my tummy allowed me to enjoy the vertigo of being hoisted high in the air. I remember being very small and Mum slowly nudging me awake. Mum would then sit, holding me in a sitting position between her knees. With her hands clasped slightly apart under each buttock, she would poise me over a piece of paper. Mum seemed to know just when I'd need to poop and pee. She would make some grunting noises, and I always felt we were going in the same direction. I watched her toilet train my sisters and brothers this way. As far as I remember, pooping and peeing always leaves me feeling enjoyable. Mum hardly ever had to deal with diapers. I know now that she had tuned into the natural ultradian biorhythms that regulate body functioning. That is, the time it takes to digest a meal or to pee after drinking, and the basic rest activity cycle occurring every 90 to 120 minutes, where there is a priming of the right and then the left hemispheres. The right hemisphere is involved in parasympathetic rest, and the left hemisphere is involved with sympathetic activity. The way Mum held us with her hands during toilet training entrained parasympathetic activity. Growing up on an island and being close to nature seemed to rivet me to the natural order of things. The smell of the earth, rain, and the sea. I felt a sense of being connected to an older, ancient self. Huge granite boulders balance on top of each other, tower up in places on the island. Weathered, they silhouette the last 40,000 years. Sometimes I'd look at these boulders and see a younger self guiding an ancient older self. I remember sitting on grandfather's knee and asking about our forebears. And so it was that he would entrance my sisters and brothers with stories about our being. He said our forebears were like galleons sailing the seas. They were containers of knowledge. He said that Jubb in Cornish means vessel, container. Phonetically, in Sanskrit, he said, Jubb or Chub means being totally present. To be jubilant in a native tongue means to exalt, manifest joy, to be glad. To be glad to have joy. One day, between the rise and fall of the tide, Grandpa was looking out to sea. He loved to spot the play of porpoises. One particular trait about porpoises that's amazing, Grandpa would say, is that in a family of porpoises, when one porpoise is talking, all other porpoises listen. And they listen and listen until this porpoise is complete before another porpoise speaks. Whatever things I do and have, love is like the sea is to this porpoise. The porpoise loves to leave the sea in their playfulness. What is most amazing is how most of the time the porpoise, at best, is in the sea. Yet, when they leap into the air out of the water, it's as if, in this moment, they ask the sea to be loving of them. Far be it better that the porpoise holds the sea close to itself than it would have held itself in the sea. This is because the sea, in its magnitude, is more able to adapt itself and can more easily unite with the porpoise than the porpoise can with the sea. Grandpa gazed out into the horizon, some several miles away, where craggy peaks of a mountain now partially covered from view tower up out of the sea. Light streaked through finger-like projections that crowned the profile of a face looking up into the sky. In the dawn of this half-light, the sea draped this crowned array in a garment of seamless satin. As the air where we sat became perfectly still, I remember his tone as he steadied these words. One day you'll travel across the seas. You'll leave all this behind. I remember feeling his hands come to my shoulders. Grandpa was getting on in years, yet somehow he spoke through, though commanding this panorama. Turning, he looked into a rising golden sun. My will is turning in harmony, like a wheel moved so evenly, like the love that turns this sun. That morning was like nature's first morning being born in me. Looking into the sun, he said, the sun pours itself forward into everything. It's the creative sustenance teeming in that which life springs. As the rise and the fall of the moon and the seas swell to the brink of overflowing, there is a continual wanting to pour all of itself out. Since all creatures have this inside, then this is in everything. Providence lights all paths evenly, for one entering the mystery of being. What seemed ordinary to me was amazing how Grandpa saw me. Grandpa would say, whatever you want to do, however you want to do this, is fine with me. Grandpa told me that our thoughts and energies are energies that our bodies become a vehicle for. Frame things positively and learn to leave yourself in all that is around. His hand and eyes surveyed our island. One day in your mastery, you'll have left all this. You'll have left yourself in the places you look upon yourself. Grandpa turned to me knowingly, and I felt his eyes drawing me inward. There's an ancient story about a sage who lived a simple life. Everyone in town knew this sage's sole possession was a gold bowl that was eaten out of. One day someone came to covet the bowl. And the moment this person came to enter the house, the gold bowl was thrown out the window. This person, realizing this is the house of a master, says, "O great one, you have given me what is rightfully yours that I had come to take. And now the bowl in my possession is meaningless. O great one, please bestow on me a teaching that my ways are mended." The sage replied, "For that which you need less than desire, you have handed over." The sage continued, "One day 2 of this sage's followers came saying, 'Look, O great one, we have given up a boat and a net to follow you.' And the sage replied, 'You have given up a boat and a net?' Grandpa themselves so much that one can find more to leave. I've traveled the world on the providence of this, to wake from sunup through twain, to that what Grandpa did least in me, I recognize he shines most. Grandfather told us many years ago, in the coastal village of Cornwall, in a land far away, around the time of the Industrial Revolution, a huge machine was erected atop the tallest tower in the village. When this machine got, then they had to wait till it got to another spot before they could leave. Grandfather said our forebears set sail from Cornwall because some folks agreed that the machine seemed to be governing the people. I later discovered this machine was a clock, and Grandfather was telling us about time. He was surmising natural, cyclical, and personal time. A little into the spring each year, Dad would start to round up all the sheep on the island, and I would figure it was shearing time. Shearers and roustabouts would come across the sea from Tasmania and live with us for about 3 weeks until shearing was complete. I loved playing in the wool. One morning during a break, one of the shearers, a most amazing fellow who had traveled more than anyone I'd met before, sat down next to me. "Look," he said, holding the rock up to the sun for me to spy veins of purple streaming through. "Here," he said, cupping my hands and placing the stone in them. Mesmerized, I felt a sense of time being suspended. I was overcome by its aromatic fragrance. It was magnetic. He instructed me to wet it and hold it up to the light. The sunlight licked iridescent streams of purple that came through layers in the rock and cascaded into my hand. From this day, I remember back how scent holds a powerful interest in me today. Curious as to how the rock could acquire such exquisite color and fragrance. The shearer told me the rock and the scent was a mixture of things. He said that color and fragrance are the stuff of how things are put together. He went on to say how our oldest intelligence comes from the rocks, and how flowers emit scent to attract bees, and that animals use scent to attract a mate, and how we use this sense to recognize things long after something has passed. I can still smell the scent on that rock years later. Sensing a pleasurable fragrance allows us to experience flow. It allows access to state-dependent memory, allowing flow between the area behind the back of the nose and connecting area between the frontal cortex, planning region, and the limbic system, emotional. Ideas come with breathing of Australia to help us with the shearing. In the early morning, we'd set out together to muster sheep on the island. Because of the island's rugged terrain, sheep herding often took several days. Dad would suss out where the sheep were likely to make a break, and so he would station us at strategic spots on the island, to make a human fence, so to speak. I remember how the brightest orange heavens surrounded us. As we listened into the morning sound, I remember the dog's first barking and saturating with dew his blue sweater. He strolled towards us as we sat around a small fire Grandpa lit in the half-light. I remember Grandpa sharing this story moments earlier. He said there was this famous sage from the East who once walked the earth a long, long time ago. It was said of how extraordinarily well-groomed, yet wayless, this sage was. People, in describing how this sage moved, have said it was like a great calm betook one of light and ease of foot, as if a rainbow of color surrounded this sage that scintillated with light. And when this sage spoke, it was like nature's breath, fresh upon the lips as from felt remains deep inside. As if through inner knowing well all characteristic of human behavior, along with the fundamental principles on which these are built. As there is an inner knowing where the eye sees and another that knows it sees. As one's soul is perceptive of this, one has inner knowing of universal consciousness and self. One is thus aware of life on earth in self. This is being adept in the eventide of light. One can see life in multiple reality. Yet as this sea of cosmic consciousness becomes conscious inside one, this is the dawn of light. This is observing all life as one, as in the ever-present, as in what this great voice Grandpa said is revealing inner knowing, reminding us of our heavenly origin, reminding us of our spiritual self and how the property of light from the sun and light from fire are a representation of this. I remember Grandpa rocking backward and forward and hearing his voice become muffled. His eyes glinted as he looked into the fire. Heat and transformation are one. Fire and the essence of what joins us, our spiritual self, seem less than like each other, even in a distant sense of nature, yet happening close in time and space. Likeness born of one is drawn from the soul, born in space of this unwavering presence that is for eternity one. Staring into the fire Grandpa had lit to greet the sun, a glowing ember shot out from the coals to be snuffed out in the cold air. Pointing to where the ember went out. Even this ember receiving the nature of the fire shows us its real origin, going out beyond its earthly guardian, beyond its earthly kin, and finally out of itself. As this sea of cosmic consciousness comes in with all it is, the ember seemingly having abandoned itself to be united with heaven itself. For it was bound to go out in the cold air, yet urgently it seemed to want to leave. Silence. I remember the silhouette of Dad's stubble as he expectantly looked out past the fire. Want to play a game? He jested. Okay, come on. Gather around and listen in. Everyone, look at the fire Grandpa has lit to greet the sun. Now close your eyes and visualize this eternal light now inside, and then visualize this eternal light flooding out into the cosmos and returning to its source. In humbleness, one can open the eyes now and behold the sun and awakening consciousness. Dad told Grandpa and I that we'd be going to the Council Rocks. The Council Rocks are up on a hill overlooking the west end of the island. This was a great spot for us to be because we could see the goings-on of the mustering. Grandpa and I trekked through the wet tundra grasses and scrub. As we walked, Grandpa said, even the dew is drawn into the sun. One first feels light in the body to see in the mind's eye. As the eye is seeing as one, our whole being is flooded with light. One is thus beholding what the eye sees in being coordinated to grow. Spiritual daring is the product of one's continued willingness, yet clouds may mask our perception of this. Likewise, if the eye was covered over, it perceives little light. Yet all shapes lay hidden in the material that is shaped as clay on a potter's wheel. Even as a sculptor cuts away rock, cutting away to bring what lies out, hidden out as one's own, so it now shines forth. Let one unfold to come into one's own image, where one is most like the inside of the universe, where one is what Great Spirit is by nature. Before reaching the mount, Grandpa paused as we looked up at the Council Rock. I remember a feeling of awe sweep over me. Looking out from the canopy of these rocks that have been my ported to a world like a mountain stands unmoved by a breath of wind. Grandpa continued, the more I've gazed at these rocks and left myself behind, the more I've rushed toward being drawn of these rocks, or anything willed. We looked out to where we could see some balancing rocks towering up into the skyline. Grandpa said, the outward work of these rocks consists of balancing on top of each other. The inner work is their inherent tendency to be drawn in toward the center of the earth. This work is inherent and is performed tirelessly day and night. They may be here for thousands of years, yet this tendency to be drawn into the center will throughout all time. The ability of these rocks have to cast their shadow is what is divine. What is divine that casts a shadow in our humanness is that work which is inward, that is throughout everything, which is broad and subject to flow, that has freedom and is fresh and ever new with use. For just as one knows well that a blank piece of paper is most suitable to write on, as nothing is already there, thus as one's heart is ready to receive these teachings, it thus rests on nothing. Thus one can embrace the past with future longing and look at all things of nature simply being. Let this threshold of the house of tomorrow be, wherein all things are nothing. For tomorrow hardly tarries much with yesterday. Look at all things of nature living the art of their life in silent prayer, in perfect uniformity with this great cosmic wheel of life. Let this garment that is always worn new be the one to remember as one is reflecting in this moment, as if this is now before me. People live in joy who live with perfect detachment, living beyond desire, beyond being rid of things. For there is a place in our soul where naught has entered, out of which arises what is mystical and prophetic, that the nature of our being is in being joined as one with each other. The more out of two one rises up, the more one is drawn of what Great Spirit is in each other. I think that if there is one thing that I love about Grandpa most, it is in his being equal to everything. I remember his calm and certainty. Grandma came with a big stick with a crystal on top of it. She said it was late afternoon. Grandma looked up and down the creek we'd been walking on. She put a dab of essential oil on her wrist and ours and capped the bottle, returning it to the side pocket of her rucksack. She straightened the brim of her hat, shading her eyes. We were going to a secret place where water rose well under a rock. She loved to draw the sun and water and air and nutrients in to sustain life. And how to assimilate and evolve, it matters how receptive we are. If one is open to taste the words we speak, to take inwardly, to taste the things we do, is to be allowing, to bend, to evolve, to be living in our divine selves. To participate in the mystery of life is to enter open, to evolve. Grandma would say, as a person's heart, so is this person's actions. Humans have made many laws, yet the eagle and all other creatures live by one law, this law of one's heart path. Anything can grow in this garden, providing the ground is prepared well. The light of this law of life can be heard in the living words of sages having come before us, who have said, love one another, that others may know you as the grandchildren of this great Spirit. And they have said, I have come to fulfill what we have in our hearts, that we want to hear, that people may live life more abundantly. Feelings are always at the base of our actions, as vitality is an expression of one's heart energy. The peacemakers, Grandma would say, are the children of this great Spirit. I have come to know how much my heart's light rings through everything. One can merge with this light and forever remain connected, that one exists with this light. I remember looking into Grandma's eyes and feeling an overwhelming sense of love and eternal bliss. People need an example they can live by, that they can identify with personally. Wise personal guidance can give direction beyond anything one can read. Among all outward ways to teach, your living example is the most effective of all. One who is freed while living is one living outwardly as normal, who adopts the habits of others and uses them. One who is free from earthly desires, where in reality one dwells in this great sea of cosmic consciousness. By stilling the mind, one becomes receptive to the divine within. The more centered one is, the more one's actions are in harmony with nature's law. Outward observance involves one's ability to love and live with heartfelt compassion toward one's neighbors. The divine consciousness of this love lights every being that comes into the world. It is present in our greatest star and our smallest atom. It is the sum of something beyond the body. It is that which animates the body. Likewise, the life of the universe is that which animates the universe. As we entered a clearing in the bush, the foot track took a sudden turn through the clearing to the left, where a dome-shaped white granite rock breached the surface of the earth. The rock was crowned around the outside with a beautiful green peat moss. Grandma put her things down at the edge of the rock and proceeded to walk to its center where a flat rock lay. She lifted this rock up, uncovering a narrow shaft leading down into the earth. She told us to lay down so that we can rest our ears on this. I remember putting my ear to the surface of the rock near the opening to pleasantly hear the echo of the rush of water far beneath. Listen to the sound of water weaving, she said. This rock delivers to us its message of steadfastness. While the bees without words direct us to sip sweetness, clouds present us with a show of being formless. It's good to use words of nature. Then one day you will be like a mountain speaking to the plains. One of the highest orders one can attain is a doctor of the body. The highest order one can attain, though, is a doctor of the people. One of the highest orders one can attain is a doctor of the body. The highest order one can attain, though, is a doctor of the people. These are doctors who interest us most in learning to care for ourselves, where love rules our feelings and wisdom our appetite. Our great healers have all healed by natural means. The sun, the water, air, and natural foods, teaching and healing are always one. Grandma would say we should teach simplicity by teaching joy and fulfillment. We should teach attitudes of openness and humility in which wisdom and discernment can flourish. This is a teacher who invites light into the darkness of being. This is one who gives themselves up to infinite love. To give yourself to active, creative love in all we leave behind. The words we use are an outward expression of one's creative spirit. Words are the soul's vibration of consciousness. Out of the vast stillness, silence, and darkness of the universe, there is the unwavering presence that is like an eternal fountainhead, pouring itself forward throughout everything. The words we put out always summon a like energy back to us. Positive thoughts affect people and things we think about. This habit of seeing the positive side of people and things allows us to remain connected to the attributes of adaptive reasoning, of success, and feelings of being integrated. Even the physical body reaps the reward of harmonious thought and feelings. As we look around, we can see forms of harmony with this law of life. Conversation, agreement, constructive critique, words allowing joy to live in feelings and thought. As things are framed positively, we dwell within a sphere of attribution peopled by living divine selves. This represents a tremendous light in our spiritual development. So we can forward ourselves, for this is truly how things are poured. As there is only movement in this sphere, light comes into darkness, even though the dark may less than be aware. Belief slipping into being. Any truth that can create behavior is discoverable, as it can be acted on and established as truth. We always thought, when I was growing up, that wellness was caused by what we believe. Of course, the nearest doctor to us was some day's journey away, so our belief system about wellness made perfect sense. If we were well, then the distance from the doctor was an accepted part of our mental set. Wellness is created as ease is felt. Disease is not the thing itself, but how the body reacts to some situation. This belief system is about the doctor being inside us. When I was 14, I was shipped north to the vast mainland of Australia for secondary education. In that first day, I saw more people than the whole of my life previously. I met people who believed they could hardly be around dogs without sneezing, coughing, and making their eyes red. This seemed crazy to me. Today I understand what we believe affects our immune system and all physiological functioning. Will is an integral part of a person's ability to recover. I can share an example so that once you believe this about the will and wellness, it changes things forever. Let's say that you believe your right arm is invincible and will hardly notice a small scratch made on it, while your left arm is highly sensitive and reacts to a scratch made on it. A few days later, the scratch on the invincible arm will be gone, while the scratch on the sensitive arm may be there for days. When someone hyperreacts, an inflammatory agent, bradykinin, is released at the site of the tissue disturbance, which makes the cell membranes more permeable through the release of histamines. A belief, like any human behavior, involves specific bodily responses. The body's response can be characterized by a transform of energy between the nerves and the vessels. When someone hyperreacts, an inflammatory agent, bradykinin, is released at the site of the tissue disturbance, which makes the cell membranes more permeable through the release of histamines. A belief, like any human behavior, involves specific bodily responses. The body's response can be characterized by a transform of energy between the nerves and the vessels carrying blood. Our belief system is involved in blood flow and cell respiration. It is known that psychosomatics can stimulate the release of peptides, energy, causing a myriad of physiological functioning, such as the regulation of sodium reabsorption, water balance, blood pressure, reflexes regulating cardiovascular output, and immune and endocrinological systems. The magnetic field coming from healing hands powerfully affects biological systems through sympathetically imbuing an energy pattern that imprints order within the system. Magnetically charged material can charge structurally similar material. Energy on this level is about likeness attracting likeness. If two cells are floating in a tank, they will find each other. Even in a state of transformation, as can be seen when beetles floating on the surface of a watering trough in the field, long past the life of individuation, float toward each other in an eternal state of bliss, being in their final act magnetized to each other. One can imagine the property of this energy to be self-organizing. The movement pattern or vibration of energy from one's biofield in life assists and can repair enzymes in biological systems. Enzymes perform the work of the body, transmutating one element into another at the subatomic level. Out of the sea of darkness into the spring of light, there is a rhythm of movement that shares the same space-time coordinate. Universal consciousness, or the Akashic records, is the oscillating imprint of our heart's path, the very same energy that rests itself around a sprouted seed, having already the magnoelectric energy pattern of the whole tree. The property of the materials we are made of allows us to hold this charge that's been cycled through some 7 generations of heavenly suns. A combination of our etheric energy, majorly in our bones, and an astral energy from the outer universe powers our biofield in life, allowing us to hold the sun's charge through times it is less available externally. We will be discussing this in greater depth in the chapter on wellness and longevity. The energy in one part of our system affects other parts sympathetically. For instance, a mood of pleasure releases a flood of endogenous opiates which begin to circulate in the body. These endogenous opiates, among other things, are involved in tagging unwanted debris, antigens. They brush past antigens and become coated. As the opiate now continues on its merry way, it leaves a trail for others of like kind to follow. Then along comes an immune cell, sniffing for like trails. Immune cells sniff out coated endogenous opiate trails and begin to crawl, chemotax, along these trails to engulf and clean up unwanted waste. The immune cell has endogenous opiate receptors within its membrane. So pleasure is an important ingredient in good immune functioning. Now, how do we get this pleasure stuff, you may ask? This question is central in what is to follow. The universality of the inside of our mind. One day while traveling, I went up into the mountains to visit with this sage. As I came close to see how this sage was living, I heard him echo into the valley. Whoever has ears ought listen. Whoever is hungry, I have something for your hunger. Whoever is thirsty, I have something for your thirst. As I approached the brow of the mount, I could see he was living in a grass hut with a bamboo fence. He had very little possessions. I could see he was living completely in his senses, sensing everything through his body. He had very little language. Hardly anyone called on him, and he hardly called on anyone else. As I came close to him, I heard him say, "There's these two ideals," as he gestured to himself. One of them is about stillness. He said I could look at him and see his movements like the surface of the ocean, yet at the very depth a stillness and serenity. I looked around and I could see there was stillness in his life. He said wherever I'd be looking on the outside, things would constantly be changing. Yet he said there's something we have in common, something we share with each other that stays constant. His hands swept across the valley that lay beneath our feet. He said, "This is inside, the universality of the inside of our mind." These words continue to caress my soul with their wisdom. This is like a steady state flow, like a stream of liberation, like a river of completeness, flowing inside self. He gestured to me. There's this second ideal. It's about movement. He looked at me and he could see I was moving in life. He said I'd learned something about this today as I walked back down the mountain. I would think about playing an instrument masterfully in life. Perhaps someone learned to play guitar, and the movement of the strings on the fingers would start to create shape at the fingertips, just as I'd feel the rocks beneath my feet. That the movement of my feet over the rocks would start to create shape. His hands swept over himself and he said, "This friction of things makes the shape of us. This friction is like anxiety we sometimes feel, those of us in the process of being shaped. Learning always occurs best with a degree of tolerance. Now that I knew this, I had learned to accept this and get on with the folly of life. I felt a warm, cool wind sweep through me that spread from my chest through my abdomen. His words were like the wind, licking me wet. I remember a clearing behind the back of my throat. To what had been said I could add nothing, nor in thinking could anything be taken away. Still to this moment, this is like a mountain drawing water to the valleys, that in turn wets everything else. One day I was engrossed with thought, thinking about this friend. And this sage came over quietly and asked me to lay back on the grass and look up at the sky. In silence, I was instructed to find some words that aptly describe my experience of the sky. Words rushed in before I caught myself. I realized that any word coming through me was less than my experience of the sky. He said I'd look in awe at humans and things in nature this same way. He looked at me in wonder that I was understanding the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Leaning further back on his elbows, he blankly beckoned. Go ahead, make the fullest use of rationalization. Quite a pause ensued. The air became filled with the droning wings of two dragonflies joined, celebrating day's light. They seemed to punctuate the silence, as if in affirmation of this sage's inner wealth. He propped himself more upright and made a gesture as if flicking something into the air. Leaning, he murmured close to my ear, go beyond this method to a direct awareness of intuitive insight. And then, his voice getting more resonant, the faculty to inspire creative influence of the future is about living according to one's intuitive self. That our intuitive self is aware of the whole. He went further to say, in this moment, you create a necessary condition inside self. Fresh visions arise from within, that this necessary condition was space, inside self. I've since learned how much nobility springs from this bareness of mind, with the barest of mind reflecting what is perfect in our actions. The excellence principle. Among one of David's major mentors is a teacher who is part Seminole Indian, Cloud. She is one of the most dynamic and innovative behavioral change agents in the North American continent. The excellence principle forwards us understanding that as we involve ourselves in excellence, surrounding ourselves in excellence, we have access to the full use of resources to pattern peak performance and maximum productivity. The 8 frames of excellence: visiting frame, resource frame, outcome frame, trust frame, co-creative frame, challenge frame, integration frame, future pace frame. From the works of Dr. Scout Cloud Lee, the excellence principle and the 8 frames of excellence are trademarks of Vision Us Incorporated. resource, adventure, playfulness, creativity, excitement, challenge. Communication and wellness technology. Clear thought always involves good word usage. This book communicates a wellness technology that offers humanity a path toward living in our divine self. It is a journey penetrating the inner core of our being, casting light into the farthest reaches of our inner self. It is about a living cosmology drawing from our deepest well, the capacity to launch global spirituality of far-reaching significance into the third millennium. It is out of our passion and care for people everywhere in perpetuating our global community that this book is written. Whole brain functioning offers insight into the origin and ultimate principle of unity within. It is about the ability to perceive and coordinate movement processes of the body to understand our nature. Researchers probing brain function during states of genius show specific neurological patterning is involved. Whole brain functioning is steeped in the latest understanding in neuroscience, psychology of learning, movement theory, linguistics, and nutrition. These factors are important in figuratively lighting the neocortex mantle. What follows is something other than involving weight. I'm sure it's bound to bend what you presently believe. This light in my life is like a fountain of which I am for eternity a garden. This work is like the smallest seed, having harvest of a billionth fold within. It is about that which spontaneously arises from the undiluted touch of our intuitive self. As we look into the mystery of being, it is a guiding light, illuminating this narrow path we traverse in life called our heart's path. Learning becomes imprinted through experience. This technology emphasizes one's internal resources. The authors disclose long-held, hidden, state-of-the-art methodology for and skills in leading, motivating, setting, and achieving personal outcomes. Whole brain functioning is used to weave models and embed structure that reorganize and imprint patterns, allowing one to live in excellence throughout life. This book may further be described to be about verbal and nonverbal whole brain patterns of living. Whole brain functioning is unique in that it forwards a communication model that is inclusive of our sixth sense, vestibular, the integrative element in behavior. This book is about awakening the structure of the other than conscious self. It is a national and internationally recognized program about transformation. The authors offer insight into innovative behavioral assessment and change techniques that are currently being taught toward an expansion of consciousness. Through whole brain functioning, we understand there is a direct and specific physiology behind each thought, word, and piece of behavior. 90% of what is coded into the brain is proprioceptive, body part movement in space. Even language is actually patterned motor movement. How we move through space is literally how the mind processes information. The body is the mind's experience of itself. For instance, our eyes open and the pupil takes information in and relax as the pupil is internally occupied. The body is the messenger of the mind, the digital and analogical readout of what is programmed through experience. One's life experience codes the nervous system through movement patterns, creating habits, conscious and unconscious belief systems, and behavior. The body must code a pattern of movement for the mind to conceive new possibility. The neural activity in one part of our biological system affects the whole system. This holds true for our bodies, the relationship we have with others, our culture, and our planet. States of genius, wellness, and longevity are natural outcomes of strategies we are employing. That is, the way we think and sort information, the body's attunement, and nutrition. These strategies affect our emotions, motor responses, cardiorespiratory responses, autonomic control of glandular secretions, body chemistry, metabolism, and immune functioning. For instance, an internal contracted sense of time may be as much the cause of a person's condition as anything else could be. It makes more sense to acquire the knowledge of a metaphysician, one skilled in a number of disciplines concerning human behavior and wellness. Experience determines the behavioral capabilities of our human condition. When a calf is born, all its neurons are completely connected. They are already connected from the brainstem through to the neocortex. It can run and kick and jump as soon as it is born. A human, however, is born with a big space between the brainstem and the neocortex. Any connections that occur in the neocortex occur as a result of learning to move through the behaviors we adopt. The body must run a movement pattern for the nervous system to be coded to use this pattern. In other words, the brain relies on its stored repertoire of experience, movement, to access desired behavior. How this movement pattern is then integrated into the sensory motor complex is important. More will be said about this in the chapter on the vestibular system. How we allow others to support us in a trust fall is how we trust in life. Patterns necessary for success need to be coded into the body through movement. Patterns such as trusting, being in balance, accepting, and giving support, checking that support systems are in place, accepting praise and self-accomplishments, keeping a role going, focusing on a goal, etc. By changing the way we guide and organize behavior through our strategies, we reorganize ourselves physiologically. Whole brain functioning presumes wellness and excellence as innate qualities, and thus recognizes the value of growing what works. Experience is necessary for habits of success to be forwarded. To focus on an outcome brings it within our grasp and programs the nervous system for success. Through whole brain functioning, there is a focus on pleasure-seeking approaches to life, realizing that as we are having fun, we present our finest strategies for success. The etiology for longevity can be traced to behavioral patterns, and shortcomings in one's health can be alleviated through alterations in behavior. In our work, we have innumerable cases where physical symptoms improve, clear up, or go into remission as a result of installing lifestyle patterns supporting wellness. Modern medicine, it is sometimes said, is the art of keeping the people mused while nature takes its course, as the body heals from the inside out. Records of those cured indicate symptoms are remedied through harnessing inner resources. Psychoanalysts emphasize language as a major vehicle for change. This emphasizes a neocortex limbic thalamic direction that is from the top of the brain down. However, most habituated unconscious behaviors are initiated by other than conscious senses involving hierarchically lower brain structures. Being aware of feeling a smile or the movement pattern of putting the shoulders back and chest out emphasizes a thalamic limbic neocortex direction that is from the base of the brain up. Behavior can be seen and shaped through body movement. The idea that thought has a corresponding physiology is supported by the synergy of psychoanalytic thinking of Freud, Jung, Erickson, and others. Having a preferential sequencing of senses is one of the many distinguishing characteristics of whole brain functioning, with emphasis toward shaping things that are being felt and or heard and or seen. We call this analog sculpting. Reshape the body's patterns and the mind follows. Movement is the broadest pathway for programming the brain. Change agents employing mind-body systems, viewing the body as a window into and an extension of the mind, among others. Whole brain functioning draws from include Alexander, Bandler, Dilts, Erickson, Feldenkrais, Grinder, Pearls, and Reich. Whole brain functioning forwards understanding of how behavior affects our internal neurological processes. We demonstrate the importance of diet and lifestyle patterns that affect emotion, brain function, physiology, and longevity. We teach the use of the vestibular system, our sense of direction, acceleration, and torque, in memory, learning, and behavior. This book will give the reader an insider's look into the structure of persuasion, how we build and maintain states of rapport, motivate self and others, learn new information, gather information on preferential sorting styles and belief systems, discover strategies for achieving desired living through verbal and nonverbal behavior with methods for anchoring, making the process stick. The reader will be versed in the art of placement and sculpting environments to achieve desired outcomes. Framing change work in curiosity, playfulness, excitement, and adventure optimizes learning. Play offers an avenue for discovering the folly of patterns we are living in life. Being involved in novel events brings the sum culmination of inner resources to patterns of thinking, social interaction, and belief systems. By wiring in successful experience, resource states are imprinted and applied toward achieving goals. If you're being asked by two people to dance, one asks enthusiastically, the other with less excitement, "Who are you going to dance with?" The spiritual fire one feels within is the greatest power transforming duality to integration. Thus, we invite people in our trainings to enjoy a sense of excitement in discovering, communication, decision-making, and leadership skills. An awareness of group process, technique in public speaking, and elevated levels of wellness that result from the application of and understanding the structure of being integrated and how certain physiological phenomena, such as how we think and what we take into our bodies, affect how we feel, what we say, and how we show up. Psychological attitude and will are involved in our ability to recover. Health professionals recognize the ease and speed of recovery as the other than conscious self is tapped in the treatment process. In this program, learning occurs on the overt or concrete level, as well as the symbolic or metaphorical level subconsciously being accessed. How we walk across a balancing log is a representation of patterns below consciousness of how we are moving through life. Someone may have taken too little or too much support or had difficulty starting. Where one's eyes are focused gives a literal indication of focus in life. Questions like, was the task finished in balance? Upon completing, are we celebrating self? This book provides the reader with a microcosm for turning environmental obstacles into decision-making variables by employing and acknowledging internal resources. Treatment modalities have explored the mind, while the body has remained inactive. The need for therapeutic approach reaching beyond talk therapy and or pharmaceutical in bringing lasting change is leading professionals to employ holistic experiential technology in the treatment process. Achievement of wellness is enhanced through engaging one in activities requiring gross motor movements and social interaction. Training in tracking how whole body movement patterns give a literal metaphor of experience at the unconscious level, as well as techniques for imprinting new behavior, are becoming a major focus as new information is available today. Whole brain functioning is taught in a sequence that is progressive, challenging, consequential, and educating to maximize progress toward desired outcomes. Each thought is a teaching itself. The authors have used verb tense to pace into the present what we are loving to live with, while using verb tense to pace into the past things we love being past. Throughout this material, there is ample opportunity to apply what is being learned. An overview of the material covered in this book includes understanding current behavior patterns, tracking skills, techniques for imprinting strategies, the physiology of diet and longevity, the chemistry of pleasure and aversion, the use of the vestibular system in memory, learning and behavior, the psychophysiology of language, belief systems, and immune functioning. Learn the use of metaphor and communication with the other than conscious self with techniques for anchoring. We uncover individual and group process with tools and techniques for packaging and unpackaging behavior. The philosophy presented here is about turning the light inward. It is about allowing the universe to become conscious in each of us. It is light awakening goodwill in us to celebrate our being. It is a language of living life with compassion and caring. Words spoken in the grace of this understanding become deeds. For this is the water of the spring of life. A sage once said that, through knowledge we give ourselves strength to hold ourselves high in the light that surrounds us. This sage went further to beg me to see people cope in dire straits and yet do this with joy, and thus allow me to experience the divine who endure and have joy. This sage went further to say that great insight comes to us through science and philosophy, yet these words that are most endearing, the ones that endure through the ages, are given to us through poetry.